what in the world is going on and why does it matter to us? So one of the things I want to ask you before I share a couple things is what's going on? Like we'll hear the news. What have you heard in the news over the past since last weekend or this week? And in particular, if it's going to relate to our study, those will always be good things. But just in general, I just want to have a little discussion about, do we know what's going on in the world? Because one of the questions I want you to think about, somebody answer this, is did Ahaz want to listen to the news that Isaiah had for him? No. Did he listen?
No.
No, he didn't. So he didn't want to hear the news, and then he just did what he wanted when he did whatever he did. It's like he heard it and ignored it. And so I think that that's an interesting time for us. There are times when for sure we do not want to hear the news. And granted, sometimes we need a break from what we're taking in. But can we keep our heads in the sand forever? According to scripture, would that be a good idea? No, it actually wouldn't be a good idea, as tempting as it is. So can anybody think of a recent headline that stands out to them? Just anything.
I was stunned, and I know it actually happened a few days or like weeks ago, but just to learn that the government has allowed China to have some control of our electrical grids, our power grids. Like
that's appropriate to the times this week,
yeah,
right?
I'm like, okay, interesting. That and the whole, push for green and everything is freezing. So Texas is like suffering because they can't get their wind turbines to go. In Texas, of all people, that should have plenty of oil.
Yes. And do you know what they spray on those green wind turbines to get them to go?
Oil.
Oil. Yes. While they're driving oil-driven helicopters. Yeah. So much for green, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Green has to be balanced with reality sometimes, maybe. So anybody else? What else? Oh, well, this might have been a good activity today. So I have a couple, and these were actually from the weekend, so I'm sure there are new ones. And but these were a couple that hit me as relevant. And one of the things I want to ask and encourage you to think about is, if you're still somebody who's watching mainstream media, ask yourself every day, did you hear any headlines that had to do with anything in the world outside of our country? Because you know what? There are things going on in the rest of the world, and you may not be hearing about them, and they may have some relevancy. So let's look at a couple things. Here's two that I have together. I kind of condensed a few things. The president of Turkey is yelling at United States about 13 Turkish people that were killed by a group of people. Israel has been sending some bombing raids on Damascus. Now, Damascus, does that sound familiar for any reason?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you might want to keep your eyes and ears open for Damascus. If you're not hearing anything, you might want to go look every now and then. We're going to hit a verse in a couple weeks that's very interesting in our study. And they're targeting Iranian stockpiles of different things. This one, I did not hear about this on any major news feed, that a US base was attacked. Did anybody hear that or know that the other day? Did you all know this news?
Mm-hmm.
No. A United States military base was attacked on either Sunday or Monday. A non-American contractor was killed and about 9 other people were injured. Why in our country did we not hear that American base was attacked? Here's an interesting one. This little girl wore a mask to school that says Jesus loves me, which isn't exactly forcing people to any kind of viewpoint. She was immediately that day made to take it off and given a different one, while everyone else is wearing whatever masks they want, sports teams, all other organizations. And then days later, the entire school district announced a prohibition on all religious messages on masks. Does that interest us at all? That's just one school system. This is what happened to me over the weekend. So this one deals with censorship. You can see I had just recently I was looking at my settings on YouTube and I saw that I did not have the restricted mode on. So I clicked it on. This was on my TV. So this is what restricted mode tells you. When you're in restricted mode, this is what it says it does. It hides inappropriate content. Now, I imagine that you can imagine what I think I'm blocking when I put on that mode, things I don't want to see. So I went to watch a video later that day, and I got this message over here that says something went wrong. This video is unavailable with restricted mode enabled. To view this video, you will need to disable the restricted mode. Anybody want to guess what kind of video I was trying to watch?
Sermon.
This is it. This is Pastor Rob McCoy in California. And this is the second one. I just clicked on this one as an experiment to see if it was blocked. This wasn't the original one I blocked. He's doing a series at night talking about American history and how it relates to Christianity. And the first night he was just talking to McEwen, I can't think of his first name, a former congressman. And this night he was talking about Rush Limbaugh's passing and something about the president and something about he was interviewing a doctor. So that's the dangerous content I was being protected from. And here's one more. Over the weekend, my phone told me, because I get their updates, that Amir Sarfati was with Behold Israel had a roundtable on, I think on Saturday morning, where he was talking with Pastor Barry Stagner and Jan Markell, who's on the radio in Minnesota, about end times. And their question was, will America step down from being a world leader? My phone told me it was on, but then when I went to search it on my TV on YouTube, it wasn't there. And even when I went to the channel for Behold Israel, that video wasn't there, which means it was blocked. They have all kinds of terms. I don't know what they mean, shadow banning, all kinds of things. So depending on your restrictions and depending on who you're following and if you've got their notifications, even things that you want to watch and that you follow regularly, at any moment, these platforms that we're using and currently right now will try to not let you see those things. So one of the things they're all encouraging you to do, if you've got people that you like, that you trust, it doesn't have to be the people I watch, but just this is probably happening. If you have pastors who are outspoken, if you have people talking about end time prophecy, if you have people who don't agree with the government's words on coronavirus or on politics, they may be being they do things so that they're not as easily findable. So one of the things you can do is subscribe to their apps, subscribe to their own updates, their own newsletters is pretty safe, because you might approach a day where you can't see any of it. So if you have their information, so what do you guys think about that? So when you hear the word censorship and that censorship is going on, has that felt real to you? Have you all experienced it or not experienced it? This isn't my first time trying to watch something that I was told. I think I've shared you what happened on Instagram before, that I was also told that we hid this video from you because we thought you might not want to see the content. Remember, it was a pastor talking about baptism. And Instagram thought maybe I might be harmed by watching that video. So that's what's happening. If you start to feel like the world of what you're hearing about is pretty small, like it's always the same news, it's always the same things going on, you might have to widen where you're watching and what you're getting. How does this relate to us? Why do I care? Why did I take up Bible study discussion time by talking about this? That's the second part of my heading. Why does it matter to us?
Because we don't want to be the ignorant ones that they were talking about in Isaiah 6. Is it
Good.
6?
Yes, good. Yes.
Your ears open but don't hear anything or whatever he says.
Yeah, exactly. We have to know. And, did, as those of us who studied John, did Jesus have similar messages? Do you think that he was similarly inclined? What's the danger if we're blocked or don't know certain news? Maybe not even being blocked, but maybe we don't even want to see it or go look for it.
That means we don't have all the information to make any decisions, or we'd make the wrong decisions because we don't have all the information.
So my heart seriously I didn't know Isaiah was going to, when I chose to study it, going to take us exactly where it did. I also didn't know it was going to take us and remind us of so many places in John, which has been really awesome to see. And we have another one of those this week. But, God lines these up, right, for a time like this. And my heart is just that we are prepared, that you're prepared, and that we can help prepare the people who may not know what you know. And so I thought it was very appropriate with the question we had at the beginning of our homework this week of how do you handle hard times? And again, as I said in my opening prayer, that we don't have to ask it as if it's a thing that hasn't happened, right? We'd all get to look at that question this week and go, well, we have spent since last March in times that we didn't expect, and that is all the same for all of us. Plus, then we each have our own individual things that still happen, and they're on top of all that. It's one of the things I've always said is that once COVID hit, everything got a degree harder. Whatever was hard before got harder. And that's kind of the way we all are. So we get to approach that question this week in your homework with, how did I handle hard news? How did I handle fear? What have I learned from that? And how am I going to go forward if days are harder, or if they're at least just as hard? So that's where we're headed in our homework. And so back to that, Isaiah 7, take a second and look at that, or look at your at a glance and see what we get for review on what happened in Isaiah 7.
Nobody's talking.
I
For
know.
7, I put God assures scared people. God offers a sign which Ahaz declines, and God offers a prophecy anyway.
Good. Good. That's a good summary. What's the prophecy he offers anyway? What's the sign he's going to give?
Get a reference to Jesus,
Okay.
but
And
also a lot of devastation, desolation, and all those fun words.
okay. So another chapter where we see this going back and forth, right? Of here's what's coming, here's the future, but here's what's coming, right? Here's the near, here's the far hope, and here's the near. So again, you can imagine if you are Ahaz, not wanting to really hear this news. And then of course, not listening to it, even though I heard it. Anybody want to add anything else on 7? And then we'll go on and read 8. All right, pretty good summary. As you might have noticed, hopefully you realized that when we split up this chapter, even though it was really long and I really didn't want you all to have to do it in 1 week, when you got to chapter 8, you could probably see through the homework that we didn't really do ourselves a favor by splitting those 2 chapters. In a way, I had these moments of, oh, that would have been a lot more helpful to understand that part of chapter 7 if we had done chapter 8 along with it. But we still get to add it back in now, and we'll see if that helps us with some of the things that were a bit confusing in a section of chapter 7. So let's divide up 8 like we did last time, and let's have just 2 readers, if one for the first page and one for the second page.
I'll read one.
Okay.
I can read the other.
Okay, good, Karen. Thank you. So whenever you're ready, Kim, Isaiah chapter 8.
Then the Lord said to me, take for yourself a large tablet and write it in ordinary letters. Swift is the booty, speedy is the prey. And I will take to myself faithful witnesses for testimony, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. So I approached the prophetess, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. And the Lord said to me, name him Maher Shalal Hashbaz. Nice name. Before the boy knows how to cry out, my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. And again the Lord spoke to me further, saying, inasmuch as these people have rejected the gently flowing waters of Shiloah and rejoice in Rezin and the sons of Remaliah, now therefore, behold, the Lord is about to bring on them the strong and abundant waters of the Euphrates, even the king of Assyria and all his glory. And it will rise up over all its channels and go over all its banks. Then it will sweep on into Judah. It will overflow and pass through. It will reach even to the neck, and the spread of its wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Be broken, O peoples, and be shattered, and give ear, all remote places of the earth. Gird yourselves, yet be shattered. Gird yourselves, yet be shattered. Devise a plan, but it will be thwarted. State a proposal, but it will not stand, for God is with us.
For thus the Lord spoke to me with mighty power and instructed me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, you are not to say it is a conspiracy. In regard to all this people call a conspiracy, and you are not to fear what they fear or be in dread of it. It is the Lord of hosts whom you should regard as holy, and he shall be your fear, and he shall be your dread. Then he shall become a sanctuary. But to both the houses of Israel, a stone to strike and a rock to stumble over, and a snare and a trap for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Many will stumble over them, then they will fall and be broken. They will even be snared and caught. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples, and I will wait for the Lord who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob. I will even look eagerly for him. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are for signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts, who dwells on Mount Zion. When they say to you, consult the mediums and the spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people consult their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because they have no dawn. They will pass through the land hard-pressed and famished, and it will turn out that when they are hungry, they will be enraged and curse their king and their God as they face upward. Then they will look to the earth and behold distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be driven away into darkness.
Okay. So more good news in Isaiah chapter 8. Again, hopefully you've prepared yourselves for the weeks ahead and we'll be looking for those glimmers of good news, which we do continue to get. And Isaiah 9 was a nice chapter to start with. But notice they only gave you verses 1 through 7. So you can prepare yourself for the next verses for the next week after that. Okay, so let's continue with this sort of in a way that your homework has been just in chunks at a time. And so we'll pretty much follow along in sections and trying to grab a hold of the cross references. They're a little easier to sort of squeeze in this week. But what's the connection here? Or is there a connection, or what is it, between Isaiah 8 and Isaiah 7? If you look at those first 4 verses, what's the continued thread?
We have quite a few thens,
Okay,
continuation and timeline.
yeah, good. What's the, you've got an interesting way in verses 1 through 4 and in verses 5 through 8 of describing, again, something that's going to happen. Well, what is the event that's being described?
The Assyrians are going to take control.
Yeah, so that's the same connection again to also back into 7. Remember that whole end of chapter 7 talking about Assyria will come and shave the land and there will be desolation, and remember all that. So we were talking about what the king of Assyria was going to do, and we still see that. So again, 2 very interesting poetic ways to describe what's happening. So how is it described in verses 1 through 4? What is the way that God has Isaiah picture what's going to happen?
Through his son.
Yeah, through this son whose name is what?
Maher-shalal Hashbaz.
And what does his name mean?
Swift is booty, speedy is the prey.
Yes, so if you see that there, and if you look that up just to make sure, that is exactly what it means. So how would you like that in either English or Hebrew? I think it's a bit challenging. Can you imagine calling that name to your child who you need to get a hold of? So swift is the booty, speedy is the prey. What does that have to do with what's going to happen? There's another connection there.
I took it as like what they want is always just out of reach. Like it keeps escaping them. What they're going after is like the prey is speedy. They can't quite get it.
Also
I don't
the,
know.
also the timing.
Yeah,
Because
Barb, what
I
timing?
don't know that he talked about the timing in 7. I can't remember, but it's very clear here.
Yeah, what's the timing?
Within the next few years,
Right, and how do we know that?
because that's about when a child can say my mother or my father.
Okay, so that's the connection, right? In verse 3, what is this? I approached the prophetess and she conceived. What's that? Who's that? What's that about? Who's speaking?
Isaiah.
Isaiah. And so he goes to his
Wife.
wife, right? So here, anybody look this up? By prophetess, what is meant here? Does it mean she's necessarily a prophetess, like he's a prophet?
I don't know.
No,
Maybe.
it might be, but it also could be just that's the term given for her because she's married to him. So we know his wife, she's to give birth to a son. The Lord gives him that name. And then this time reference tells us that before the child can do what?
My father or mother.
Yeah, to cry out to his parents. And so that's a range, but it's not a long range, like dozens or 20s or hundreds of years, right? Within a few years. So think then of the name of the child. Swift is the booty, speedy is the prey. You are the prey, you're the booty, you're the prize that's going to be taken when you will be carried before the wealth of Damascus. So this relates back to the other connection in 7, right? And the spoil of Samaria. It's those kings that were going to come against Judah, right? And so they will be taken away by the king of Syria quickly at the time of this prophecy. Okay, and keep in mind Barb's thought that I don't know if we were given a time in 7, because there are 3 places in chapter 8 that actually connect back to a very confusing word that we had in chapter 7. And this is one of the places, but we're going to wait till we get to all 3 before we fully address it probably. Okay, verses 5-8, now the same event is added to a little bit and described in another way, another very poetic way. What's the picture in verses 5-8?
Gently flowing stream versus a flood.
Okay, which is which? What's going to happen, Barb?
God offered him his way, he offered himself, and that's like a gentle flowing stream. And, so you think about all the analogies there. And then the other is the strong, abundant waters like a flood, because it's going to rise, go over channels, go over its banks, sweep onto Judah, overflow it, pass through, reach even to the neck. And it'll fill the land.
Okay.
That's a flood.
Okay. So let's add some of the detail here. So when it talks about they rejected the flowing waters of Shiloah, does that connect to anything else we've had in Isaiah? Did you guys look to see what that refers to? Where is that?
I don't see it.
It's a river near Jerusalem that flows. gives them, and Jerusalem has no like pools or reservoirs, so they need that water. It's what sustains them.
Yeah, you remember where was Isaiah supposed to go meet Ahaz?
On that thingy. I can't remember what they call it.
End of the conduit, wasn't it?
Yeah, so you guys have that map handy that shows where that conduit is and what it's called, what pool it is?
I'm guessing it's Siloam.
Yes, it is. Good guess.
Can't find my
This-
map, but I remember seeing
Yes, if you look on that map, it actually says this is the pool that has this name. This is where they met. So another interesting connection. Anybody remember from the Gospel of John, one of our big signs happened at this pool? Anybody remember which one maybe?
Was it the healing?
Yeah, which healing of whom? Because everybody went through the list of everything else Tuesday night, missed the one I wanted.
Was
But
he the blind man?
yes, the blind man. Thank
The
you,
man
Marcy.
born
So
blind, the
the
messianic.
man born blind. This is the pool that Jesus had him go wash in. So just some really interesting tie-ins that this is the body of water that comes, and then this pool was named after this. So very interesting connection here. So the people rejected the flowing, the gentle water of God. And then when it says they rejoice in Rezin and the son of Remaliah, who are those guys?
The kings of Samaria and Syria.
Okay, so we've been thinking about Judah, but in some cases we know we also have to think about all of Israel. So when you look at particularly that they would be rejoicing in these kings, would that be the people of Judah rejoicing in those kings? Or would it be the people of the northern kingdom? These were the two kings that were going to come and attack Judah. So probably we have a reference here that we're going to talk about the northern kingdom. We're also going to talk about the southern kingdom, and he's going to go on. Do you see that there? That all the people have probably, we know both kingdoms have rejected God. Here's a specific word though, to the north. And then, because remember the order of what happens and what it said in verses 1-4, who does the king of Assyria come against first? It says it right in verse 4.
Damascus and Samaria.
So these two kings that are going to come against Judah, right? That's who the Assyrian, because of what Ahaz did, if you remember from our other references, because Ahaz went to the king of Assyria, he goes and he conquers these other two. So we have this word that first it's going to bring on them those who rejoiced in those two kings. So first it's going to get the northern kingdom. And then what's going to happen? This picture is really clear. Barb told us, where will the waters go and what will they do? The king of Assyria will go and he'll go against those northern kings because Ahaz paid him to. Then what's going to happen though? If you open a floodgate, can you stop where it goes?
Goes to Judah next.
Yes, so then even though Ahaz thinks he's protecting his country by encouraging this captivity and this war that he sends to these two kings, then like waters that are like a flood, it comes back to them. It will sweep on into Judah in verse 8, and then it reaches how far?
The neck.
The neck. So what does that tell us, that the flood waters would only get to the neck of Judah, if you think of that as a picture?
I don't know why, but it makes me think of suffocation.
Yeah, suffocation, but is the head underwater?
No.
No.
No, because as we have already been told, because we've seen the timeline, is it the Assyrians who completely destroy Judah? No, they actually end up being taken into captivity by whom later?
Babylon.
Babylon. But just think of this picture that you following your own desires, your own ways instead of God, you invite this other king in to take care of your enemies, and he does. But then as he does that, eventually who does he come and also take? Himself. You invited this. He invited this in on his own because he didn't do what that we were told to do in verse 7. What was it that Ahaz was supposed to do?
We're supposed to turn to God and just trust God, not trust earthly kings.
Yes, he said, believe me, I'm going to take care of this. And there was that warning, if you don't believe, you won't hold firm, whatever that exact verse was. I should know it. If you will not believe, you surely will not last. So if you don't stand firm in your faith, you won't stand firm at all. So this is the connection in there. What's this interesting last line here about this thing that's going to happen in verse 8?
And the spread of its wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel.
Okay, what did you think of that? Oh, you know what? Let's hold on to that. Let's talk about your cross references about waters. Let's talk about those because we did go look at those in some other places, and these are great verses, especially because Jeremiah talks about the same thing. And this is page 65. I wrote that one down. I don't know if I'll have them all, but I got that one for you. I always start and then I forget later. So page 65, you looked at Jeremiah 2, 13 and 18 and 19. What did that have to do with what we're talking about? This picture of waters.
They have forsaken the fountain of the life-giving waters, and they built for themselves broken cisterns.
Okay, so these same people, right? Again, this continued word that they forsook, right? They have forsaken the fountain of living waters. Remember, this is being described in the Old Testament, the fountain of living waters. And then what additional thing or reminder was added in the 18 and 19?
Their own wickedness would correct and reprove. But the fact that they made cisterns to collect water so they'd have water, but they were broken ones that can't even hold water. So they drank. So the whole idea there is that even the water they had was tainted and dirty because they were broken containers that the water was in. So it's like the tainted water even, and the contrast there for us just like dynamic, because we do that. We make our broken cisterns to try to get water, our living, our life, and we don't just trust God and have that living water. It's like a contrast. We have such choices.
Yes, good. So how does this sound then like what happens here with Ahaz and the people? That they didn't follow God, they didn't trust his waters. He went somewhere else and opened a floodgate, and did that come back on them instead of accomplishing that? Yeah, anybody want to say anything else about the Jeremiah passage before we go to the New Testament? Really cool to go to that place.
Their own wickedness would correct and reprove. It's like he even says, you do that, there are consequences.
There are consequences. Yeah. Yeah. And that, remember, as we talk about God's people, again, us as God's people, that's that thing that your eternity is secure if you believe Jesus, but you can still make choices on this earth that will have consequences if you choose to go that way. And that's just such a good reminder to us that following God's way is why we need to know his word, because that's where it is. That's where you know what it is. And we'll see verses like that. Let's go to John 7, 37 to 38, which I thought was interesting because my mind immediately went to a different passage, but we'll talk about it here. But they took us to John 7. So what did you learn there?
If you believe in the scriptures, from his innermost being shall flow rivers of living water.
Okay, good. That if you believe, again, you will have living water in you, in your innermost being. Did anybody think of a different passage in John when they read this thing about living waters? One of our wonderful encounters that we looked at.
Oh, the woman at the well.
The woman at the well, John 4:10. If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have called him and you would have asked and he would have given you living water, and they would become in you fountains of water springing up into eternal life. The language is the same as in Jeremiah, fountains of living water. So I loved that picture. And again, my mind went there before John 7, but both are good connections. How about Revelation 22, almost the end of the Bible, almost one of the very last, well, it is one of the very last verses, not quite the final one. What did we learn there? The very end of the time, what does Jesus still want you to know?
Let one who is thirsty come. Let one who wishes to take water of life without cost.
Without cost.
That you see that in another passage in Isaiah that will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So good. This picture of God talking about himself as waters really relates here to Isaiah. Any more about those or any of your application before we then talk about that verse 8? These are one of those parts where we're going to connect to chapter 7. So the timing that we see about the child in verses 1 through 4, obviously the title Emmanuel will take you back to 7:14. And then we'll have another section that'll take us all back to 7:14, 15, and 16. So here, when you see this, what did you think when you see this verse from Isaiah? And the spread of its wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Why does Isaiah say that?
Well, Emmanuel means God with us. And I think they just felt like even though they weren't serving him, God was going to be with them. And so he's saying, look, my hand is off. I'll be with you, but it's not going to save you this time.
Okay, so that's one very definite, right? These are these places where I'm always going to remind you, take what you know for sure when you leave a section where you're not sure. And that's just, yes, God is with them, right? Look at this, what will happen. The reminder, that's always a reminder to them. Oh, Emmanuel, God with us, looking at this land. But then also we had that reference again, learning that phrase in 7:14. You have to wonder, what they thought as they heard this. So we see it listed there one way, but we're also going to see it again. In the next set of verses, we change people. We change people that we're looking at, right? So who is being spoken to in verses 9 and 10 versus who we were just looking at? Who are the peoples?
I think this is Judah. Back to Judah.
The clue is actually in the next line.
Oh, it's everyone.
Yeah, it's everyone. So this is give ear, all remote places of the earth. This is you who will come against who? All the people who might want to come against whom?
Israel.
Israel, any of Israel, God's people. And then as you look at this, think about what God had said to Ahaz in chapter 7. So what is Isaiah's word to the people here? These peoples of all the remote places of the earth. What will happen to them and what will they try to do and what will happen to them?
So whatever they do, they have a plan and a purpose. It's just not going to happen because God's with us.
Right. So when you see that God is with us, if you look at that in the Hebrew, it would still say what we would expect it to say, that Emmanuel. Remember, El is one of those parts of the word for God. So if you look that up, you're going to see the same thing. It's just we had it written this way. So what kind of plans and proposals will the nations, the places of the earth, make that won't stand?
Conquer?
Hmm?
To conquer?
Yeah. So does this sound very similar to a verse in chapter 7? State a proposal, but it will not stand.
They'll wage war, but they won't conquer it.
Okay. What did God say to Ahaz?
Ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God, make it deep and Shiloh or as high as heaven.
Yeah,
No.
before that, what did he say? What was Ahaz afraid of in chapter 7? Come on, you know what he was afraid of. You don't have to look. What
That
was
he
going
shall
on?
not
What were they afraid
stand,
of in
nor shall
chapter
it
7?
come to pass.
What, Jasmine?
I said it shall not stand, nor shall it come to pass.
Okay, that sounds very similar. What was it that was not going to stand or come to pass?
The attempted overtaking by Rezin and Pekah.
Okay, so look at the connection here. So now God is saying, you other nations, you remote places of the earth, if you come, if you do that, if you have these kind of plans, they're not going to stand. God is with us. God is with these people. Now, as Barb has already said, are they going to experience some consequences of their choices?
Yes.
But is God going to abandon or forsake them forever? No, he's already given us promises. We've seen of that in Isaiah 7. Now, if you continue that thinking in 11 through 15, if you know partly, if you remember what's been going on, you can see what Isaiah starts to say for himself in these verses. There's some really interesting messages for him. What did God say to Isaiah in those verses? What is he supposed to do or not do?
Essentially, don't be stressed about what's going on outside. He's got this. God has this in his hand. Trust God. It's the Lord of hosts whom you should regard as holy. And he shall be your fear. He should become a sanctuary then.
Okay, so somebody else take what Barb said there, and she gave us the second part. The Lord should be your fear, he should be your dread. Why did he say that? What's the contrast in the verses right before that? What should he not do then?
Call it a conspiracy.
Yeah, I want somebody else to talk.
I didn't
Barb?
get that. I didn't understand that, so.
I'm calling on somebody else to tell us. Barb gave you verse 13. What's the contrast in verses 11 and 12?
We're
What
not,
is, go
we're
ahead.
not supposed to fear what people are fearing. We're not, like, we're supposed to fear God. We're not supposed to fear all the conspiracy theories and the, I don't know, all the crazy
Okay,
stuff my sister
so we
comes
look
from.
at the word conspiracy and think a very specific thing, which it can be that very specific thing. But also if you look it up, it means a league of people coming to do something. So what's the connection very specifically to where Ahaz and Isaiah are and what was just told? Don't be afraid. Don't listen to this. What's happening? What's the context?
When people come up against them and try to overtake them and seize them and destroy them, they need to remember that God has made this promise to them, that he's never going to forsake them, that God is always with them, and they need to trust in that and what he says and not fear what these people on earth are threatening to do against them.
Yeah, in a very specific way, you look exactly at the context that they're in. So this is the current conspiracy, this league of people coming against them, a group of people gathered to come against them. But also you can take it much bigger, as Karen was saying and Barb was saying, that anything that look at verse 11. If you don't take anything else away, verse 11 The Lord spoke to me with mighty power and instructed. By the way, if you look up the word instructed, it's actually more like admonished or corrected. It's much stronger than instructed. Instructed me not to walk in the way of this people. So just listening to the fact that it's a conspiracy is only one of the things he says. You are not to be like them in that you are not to what? Verse 12, the last part.
Not
You
to
are not
fear.
to fear.
Do not fear what they fear. This is the people of the world. Do not be in
Dread.
dread of it. So this is a place where we can look and see very specifically back to the theme question of the week. How are we handling times of fear and dread? And how are we handling them the same way the world handles them? Or do we have a different way to handle times of fear and dread? Do we follow and listen to every single thing that the world is afraid of and dreading? No. And this is a place where you might get flack if you do not agree right now or fear or dread every single thing that the world is running around like with the chicken with the head cut off. But that's okay, right? Is that okay? Why is it okay if you get flack for not believing every single thing that you might hear about or being afraid of everything everybody else is afraid of? Why is
Because
that okay? What,
we're not-
Marcy?
We're not of this world. We have Jesus in us.
That's right.
To
We
be
are
that
not
light
of this
to
world.
others.
That's right. And what did Jesus tell us? What did he remind his disciples in the book of John? What should we not only not think might happen, what should we expect to happen?
We should absolutely count on having adversaries and people coming up against us, because if we're going with the flow and it doesn't feel like anybody's coming against us, then we probably aren't standing on the narrow way.
We probably aren't. That is just true. And today I'm telling you, if you look at what we showed at the beginning, if you see pastors talking about other things and the media is censoring them and banning them and they're just speaking the truth, then the only reason we see it happening to them is because they have a bigger platform than we do. So they're experiencing it in a very big way. But if you speak these things, more than likely, and I know some of you have had this happen in your friends and in your families. I've had it happen in mine. Jesus said it would. If it's the truth, do you have to worry about what you've stood with? No, because who's going to stand with you?
The Lord.
The Lord. It's when you're not standing in what he stands for that you have to worry, because he's not going to be standing in those same places. And then you're literally alone, right? Or you're following somebody else. So that is such a good word there in verse 11, just the general, don't walk in the way of this people. And then you are not to fear what they fear or be in dread of what they are in dread of. And instead, Barb already gave us his instruction. The Lord will be your fear. The Lord will be your dread. And if he is, he will become for you, those of you who do this, what else is he for you?
Sanctuary.
He's your sanctuary. He's the place where you will actually be protected, is with him, not outside of the things he stands for. But, right, there's a but. To whom now is this word? We know for sure which of the groups of his people he's talking to here, because it tells us. What's the contrast if you don't do that?
He becomes a stone to strike, a rock to stumble over, a snare and a trap for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So
Okay,
it's
and
for both houses.
both houses of Jerusalem. So this was interesting, and your homework started by asking you if it sounded familiar. Did it sound familiar?
Yes.
Yes, and we went to the places that reminded us why it sounded familiar. I don't think I have the page number for you. It's probably a few over. Went to Romans 9:33.
Page 67.
Thank you. And 1 Peter 2. Somebody tell me what you learned in Romans 9:33.
I just summarized both of them. Jesus is the stumbling block.
Okay, what does that mean, Kim? Why, and who was saying that? Well, I guess it's different in both places, so never mind, that doesn't matter.
Paul said it in Romans, and
Yes.
Peter said it in Peter.
Good, so two different people in the New Testament said it. What does it mean that Jesus is going to be this stumbling?
Well, in my head, I jumped back to Psalm, and I can't, I think it's 118, where the psalmist said, the stone that the builders rejected will become the cornerstone, and it will be, the stumbling block. And then it goes back, and it's in here too, that Jesus is the stumbling block for people, that they will, the Jews will get hung up on, is this really the Messiah or not? They can't see past, he wasn't who we thought he was going to be, so we can't accept him. And then, yeah.
Okay, good. I want to do something. That's both those passages say that, and there are other places. We're going to actually run into one. And what about Matthew? I'm going to do something with have us look at the First Peter, but did Matthew also say the same thing? Matthew 21, 22 to 44. You actually have to read from verse 42 here. They only gave you 44. I'm not sure why, but if you guys can open to Matthew 21 and look at verse 42, it's really helpful here because it's different than Romans and First Peter. Does anybody have 21:42 in Matthew?
Saying, what do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? They said to him, the son of David.
Matthew 21, verse 42. Yeah.
Matthew 21:42, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
They said to him, he who brings these wrenches to a wrenched, and they rented out the vineyard to other wine growers.
No, 42.
Yeah, just start. I do want to go to 33, Marcy, but start with 42. I have a lot of extra scripture this week.
Okay. Jesus said to them, did you
Yes.
never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builder rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. This came about from the Lord, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and be given to a nation producing the fruit of it. So given to the Gentiles?
Yes, and now what's 44 say?
And he who falls on the stone will be broken to pieces, but on whoever it falls, it will be shattered him like dust.
Okay, so who
Scattered him
is,
like dust.
yep, so who's speaking this time?
Jesus.
Jesus. So Jesus himself is speaking this prophecy. And actually, Marcy must have read my mind because the rest of this passage, this is the end of Jesus sharing a parable. It is so perfect to Isaiah that I don't know why they didn't have us read it. So Marcy, would you start that same passage at verse 33, and then you don't have to read when you get, so just read 33 to 41.
Okay. Listen to another parable?
Yeah.
Listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard and put a wall around it and dug a wine press in it and built a tower and rented it out to a vine grower and went on a journey. And when the harvest time approached, he sent his slaves to the vine growers to receive his produce. And the vine growers took his slaves and beat one and killed another and stoned a third. And he sent another group of slaves larger than the first, and they did the same thing to them. But afterwards he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But when the vine growers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. And they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard came, what will we do to those vine growers? In 41, they said to him, he will bring those wrenches to a wrenched end and will rent out the vineyard to other vine growers who will pay him the proceeds at the proper seasons.
Okay, so what chapter in Isaiah does that remind you of? Anybody remember? Did we talk about a vineyard? How about that? Yeah.
5?
Amber? Oh, you're 5. Thank you. Amber's giving us the 5. Yes. What did Jesus say, God say? What were his people like? What were they? They were a
Vineyard.
vineyard. What did Jesus say the Jews were in Matthew?
They were the vine growers.
They're the vine growers. They're a vineyard, right? There's a vineyard. What did God say about the fruit that was being produced in his vineyard in Isaiah 5? Was it?
No.
No, it was
Expected
worthless.
to be. He wanted
What
it
does-
to be.
What does this parable say? Were they producing good fruit? No, because Jesus says at the end, he says, therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. Why did we get, who is the nation that this Jesus has been given to? It was taken from the Jews. This care of this vineyard, the care of the vines was taken from the Jews and given to whom?
The Gentiles?
The Gentiles, the believers then, right? Us. There is a nation of people who will. So we need to remember that, and Paul talks about it too, right? Their rejection is what brought us in, although we know later they're coming. But I just was so struck with the connection here to the vineyard and Isaiah 5 that I really was kind of shocked they didn't have us read the whole thing. But beautiful reminder. And again, look at how Jesus is tying everything in to what the Jews would have already known about in Isaiah in the Old Testament. Constant pictures for them. So here's this stumbling stone. And in Isaiah, God says, if you don't do this with the Lord, if you don't make him what you fear, him what you dread, then he's not going to become your sanctuary. Instead of a sanctuary, he becomes the thing that you're going to trip over. And he says that they will happen and you'll be broken, snared, and caught. Okay, what do we learn next about Isaiah in verses 16, 18? What's he saying he's going to do then? He's hearing the word of the Lord, isn't he?
Gonna wait and look eagerly for God.
Okay, wait and look eagerly. What else do you see in those verses? This is where we might get some help, or maybe not. What's 7, 14, and 15 and 16? Did some of this sound familiar or not? So he had said, bind up the testimony and the law among my disciples. There's a group of us. We're going to bind this up and we're going to wait for the Lord because he's told us some promises and given us some things. We're going to wait and watch for him. Look eagerly for him. But then what does he say in verse 18? This is Isaiah speaking. And what does he say in verse 18?
The Lord's given him a sign.
Yes. What are the signs?
Does that revert back to 7:14, where the son of was going to be born and call him Emmanuel?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Would you just read verse 18 for us, Melinda?
Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are for signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells on Mount Zion.
Okay, so just take that and then break that down. I, Isaiah, and the children whom the Lord has given me. What children and what are their names? What children has the Lord given to Isaiah?
Swift
don't-
is the booty, swift is, or the booty and prey one.
Yeah, so that's the second one. And that refers to what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
What is going to happen? So that son refers to
The punishment.
punishment, the captivity, right? Or the attack, right? That. What was the first son? You don't have to remember his Hebrew name if you don't want, if you just want to tell us what his English name is.
Remnant shall return.
A remnant shall return. Okay, so now look and see what verse 18 says. I, Isaiah, and these two children named swift is the booty, speedy is the prey, and a remnant will return, are from whom the Lord has given me for signs and wonders in Israel. So he's saying these two children are for signs and wonders. Now, yes, go back, or if you can think about 7:14, we have the Emmanuel prophecy. So do we know for sure that 7:14 in one way refers to Jesus? Do we know that for sure? We talked about it when we talked about 7.
Mhm.
Yes, because it's quoted in Matthew, right? It's quoted and said that this is a fulfillment of this sign. But then there were those other 3 verses, and I don't know if you remember, I asked, did anybody want to talk about them? And nobody did. Nobody wanted to talk about them, so we didn't. But now look at them. There's before the boy will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose 2 kings you dread will be forsaken. There is a time frame there, right? Before this little boy is old enough to do these things. Does that sound maybe like the same kind of time frame of a boy who isn't old enough before he can speak about his parents' names? This event is going to happen. Do they seem related now?
Mhm.
Yes. So we are looking again, if you look at this in commentary, you'll get the range of the things that are possible. So, but we know this refers to Jesus, the Emmanuel part. But now, does it also look like there's a child born at that time?
Mhm.
Yes. So this could be these sons or the second son, or they vary on who. These are definitely called by Isaiah signs of what's going to happen. So remember when we talked about prophecy, we talked about near fulfillments and far fulfillments. Does that look like it's possible what you're seeing in 7 and 8? Does that help explain verses 15 to 17? Because they didn't seem very connected to Jesus, did they? In that chapter 7. But do they seem connected to what's happening in chapter 8? Jasmine, will you speak out loud?
Yes.
Yes.
They seem much more connected with the prophecy of the second son and the references to the boy. Because yeah, they didn't line up with the timing of the Jesus prophecy in 7. They seemed a little disjointed.
Yeah, they seem disjointed, and we wouldn't necessarily, and we weren't told that either one of the sons is not called Emmanuel, right? But there is this continued reference to God with us. So again, you can look at different places and you can kind of see a variety. They don't agree. But to me, when I got to see 8 put with 7, and I just look at what God's word says, it was very much helpful. Does that help you guys, or do you still have questions? Anybody else?
Is there 2 different times then that Damascus and Syria are going to be destroyed then? Or I'm having a hard time putting it all together.
Yeah,
I looked at all these questions and went,
Yeah, we addressed that a little bit last week. There are a few different things. So when you're back in 7 and it says that there is a day when they will no longer be a nation, and they gave that time frame. That's that eventual part where that one of the kings sent other people back to live in the land. And so that's the date that people give for that part of it. That was sort of the final thing that yes, Judah had people there, but this other king sent other people there. And so they were no longer a separate nation. They were intermingled. So yeah, Karen, it kind of crosses over
events. Okay.
multiple time frames, and your timeline will help you there a little bit, but not fully.
Okay.
So yeah, good. So anybody else have questions or comments on how to relate all of this stuff to go? If you keep your mind on the context of what you know, get that picture of this event that really, Isaiah's been talking about since the beginning, right? These destructive things are going to happen to you. And in the last couple chapters, we've seen very specifically this picture of the king of Assyria. And remember, he's brought into the picture because Ahaz invites him in, and then these things happen. And so if you keep that context of this looming battle, the looming captivities in your mind, it can help somewhat with the context. Okay. But also the promise for good, which Isaiah says he's going to wait for, right? He's going to eagerly look, right? Okay. Final words then in the last few verses of Isaiah 8. What are we told here? Which is a good reminder for us too.
So Isaiah says that like when people are advising you on who you should look to for counsel and guidance, that so often people turn to other things other than God, and shouldn't you consult your God on what you should do, instead of, you know, dead people or other mediums or people who are going to try to predict when you have access to God, who knows and can guide you in accordance with his plan.
Yeah, so who specifically are the people here that people might in that day and today consult instead of God?
He says mediums and spiritists.
Yeah, do we ever hear about, or do we know what he means there?
Just this morning, I saw the one of those infomercials for the California, what do they call them? California psychics.
Oh,
Tell me
the
what to
psychic.
do. Tell me what to do. And oh, I was thinking about doing this, and my psychic told me this.
Yeah, so you know, it's one of the places where people talk about, oh, does God really care about that? Does God care about that if you claim to be his people?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the question's really clear here. Should not a people consult their God? So if you're a people of God, whether you're an Israel people of God or a Christian people of God, you should just talk to God. You should consult God. And also then there's a danger. If you look at the words there up in the Hebrew, it's really interesting, all the connections to what these people do and who they're consulting, right? As Jasmine said, essentially they're consulting the dead. They're consulting spirits, which is why they're called spiritists. And that's never where you want to open up any kind of windows.
We always look at the story of Saul, and he consulted mediums, and God didn't look favorably on that at all,
Yeah.
and he died.
No. So we have a warning here. So then Isaiah says what? If they don't speak according to what? If the people, if they're not consulting God, means they're not speaking according to what?
The word.
The word, and it's listed there as what two things? And he's already mentioned them once before.
Law and testimony.
The law and the testimony. Why does he call them the law and the testimony? Anybody want to give us the background of what the word was called back then? Anybody know what he means by the law and the testimony? The law is the Torah, and that's the Hebrew word. If you look it up, it's the Torah. It's the books of the Old Testament, the law books. What are the testimony? What makes up the testimony in the Old Testament?
Just the
I
people.
would think God is like the story of what God did, like Exodus, that whole story there.
The story and the prophets, right? The prophets, all of it. It's all the testimony. So all the word that they have, if you do not speak according to this word, why is it? Why would the people not end up speaking according to the word? What does it say about them?
They have no dawn.
What does that mean to you?
No
No
hope.
future.
No hope, no what? Somebody else
Future.
spoke to. No future,
No light.
no light. So if you think of those words, no hope, no light, no future, especially the no light, and you think back what Isaiah was told his message would be to the people. We've already referenced this a couple times, right? They'll have ears, but they won't hear. They'll have eyes, but they won't see. There won't be any understanding, right? If they don't stick to the word, they don't have any dawn. They don't have any light. They don't have any understanding. Other thoughts on that? And then the final place we've been ending. Amber, were you going to say something? Just moving.
It's kind of an off topic, but like when you're talking about seeking the mediums and talking about all these things, my kids and I were even talking last night about giving credit to things. So for instance, when you say, if the universe,
Oh,
you know what I mean? If you hear people say things like that, like it's not necessarily seeking something else, but it's
yeah.
giving credit to or saying that something else is in control besides God.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, makes my skin crawl when I hear that stuff. And I'm sure that's probably what it's doing to God too. I don't know if he has skin, but it's making something unhappy. Yeah, I mean, and these are words for us today. Like, do you not just feel like, wow, God, this is really old, and it just feels so important that we know what you're saying here. We're going to end this chapter with sort of the same then consequence that we've been ending with, right? How does Isaiah now describe the same thing that's being described? If these people consult other places instead of God, if they don't have any understanding because they don't stick to the word, what's going to happen to them?
They'll be driven
All
away.
of the deeds.
Okay, Marcy, you go ahead. Jasmine was making funny noises, so.
Oh, they'll be driven away into the darkness.
Okay, darkness, and Jasmine had some other words for us. All of the what?
All of the D's. So distress, darkness, and then
Yep.
he uses hard pressed and famished, but desolate would be, yeah.
Desolate from another one, and you can even take gloom of anguish and change it to despair, right? If the alliteration helps you, right? Because of these things, again, it's the same thing. God is God bringing them some kind of consequences or judgment just out of the blue because he just wants to? No. Why will these things happen to them?
Disobedience.
Disobedience. Somebody mentioned it earlier. They have choices. They had warnings even. They were told, even at this point, this hasn't happened yet. This is the warning, right? This is the make your choice. I'm telling you what will happen. You can still choose it. It's not too late. But we know that very quickly things will fall into place. And we already saw Ahaz choices because we looked them up in other places. Any other thoughts on 8 before we connect it really quickly to 9, because they are definitely connected? Okay, would somebody read 9, just 1 through 7 for us, because that's as far as we went in the homework.
I can.
Okay.
But there will be no more gloom for her who was in anguish. In earlier times, he treated the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali with contempt. But later on, he shall make it glorious, by the way of the sea, on the other side of Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. Those who live in a dark land, the light will shine on them. You shall multiply the nation. You shall increase their gladness. They will be glad in your presence, as with the gladness of harvest, as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. For you shall break the yoke of their burden and the staff on their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, as at the battle of Midian. For every boot of the booted warrior in the battle tumult and cloak rolled in blood will be for burning, fuel for the fire. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this.
Yay, good news, right? And the connection's really easy in this chapter because what's the first word of chapter 9? But. So you pretty much know it has to refer back to what we just read. And so the last verses of 22, we're talking about the land being in this gloom and in darkness. And now think about, in light of what's happening in these first 7 verses, think about the picture that the people who don't cling to God's word will have no dawn. Now think of that in terms of what's being said here. If you don't dread God, make him your holy place, believe in what's coming, you will not have this. But for those who do, there is good news coming. If you make the Lord your sanctuary, what will happen to you? What's the main idea that's happening in 9:1-7? What is coming?
A light, a new hope.
Light is coming to the darkness. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. So people in darkness have this hope of light coming. What do we learn in verse 1 and how did it connect to the New Testament? You looked at some Old Testament to get the context, but what did you learn connected to verse 1? This would be like probably in the very last section of here.
That's where Jesus' ministry started, when he came out of the temptation in the wilderness. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, so he went there to this place, to Galilee, and what did it say when you look at that scripture? He went there for a reason. What does it say? Because it does what? Is it connected to this passage?
Yeah, it fulfills prophecy.
It fulfills the prophecy. So it fulfills what the prophet said. So we have this connection. So it's one of those places where next to your verse 1 there, you could write down Matthew 4:12-17, because that is a fulfillment of verse 1 of Isaiah 9. So cool, right? Like Barb said, that context here that he went and he did it where it was. Okay. What are the things that are going to happen when the light comes? And what did you think about timing and where you would place these things? Let's talk about that in the 5 minutes we have left. When does Jesus come as the light?
In the future. It's going to be very much in the future.
Okay, very much in the future. We want to talk about a little bit to divide this up between your first coming and second coming. For those of you that are looking, or if you look at some of these and you think, I don't know if that happened when Jesus came the first time. So we know from the book of John, what did Jesus call himself and what does the book of John call him? And one of the things he's called in that book?
The light of the world.
The light of the world. So he did come as the light. Did he accomplish all of these things in this list that first time? No. So, and in fact, if I look at it, it doesn't look to me like they're even like a chunk here and a chunk there. It kind of looks like they go back and forth. So in a spiritual way, all of this happens for anybody who believes in him, right? Your oppressors, all of that will happen. However, there are some specifics that also don't really happen. What are some of the things that you would say are probably yet to come for us? Because, you know, for these guys, all of it was yet to come. But if we were going to try to think, what are some things that you would look at and think, well, that is probably more about his second coming?
Verses 4 and 5
Would be which part, Jazz?
would be still yet to come in his second coming.
Okay, and why would you say that? What's this battle that's being referred to, and or just why in general are you thinking it's to come later?
Because he didn't come the first time in any sort of ruler or governmental or battle type figure. He was here walking the earth, preaching his ministry, and he was doing the other things. He was the light. He was, you know, ministering and giving people gladness, and he was with them, but he wasn't leading them through any type of battle. And that's something that we see a picture of him doing later on.
Okay, so in that part, you could see that as a future reference. We know that there are battles yet to come when he finishes. But in some other ways, what else do you guys see? What are you looking at there?
I think of will be for burning fuel for the fire, the lake of fire.
Okay. Yep. The
Because
end result.
that's the end
Yep.
of the,
Yep. And lots of references to blood, right? We know that's going to be very bloody battle.
mhm. Yep, and there will be no end of his government or of
Right.
peace.
So when you get down to 7, for sure, right? These are references to that future kingdom. And we've already talked about the throne of David. It'll be his kingdom at that point will be established. It'll be upheld with justice and righteousness. Is his kingdom being upheld right now on the face of the earth with justice and righteousness? Or did it even happen at that moment? No, it didn't happen then. And it sure doesn't feel like it now, right? It feels like there is some victory yet to come. We have the promise of it. But from then on and forevermore, it will be accomplished. And we're told that many times in scripture. What do you think about this break the yoke of their burden and staff on their shoulders? And that's why it looks like it goes with the second part of the verse, but also in a way, did that happen the first time he came? There is a clear reference there to the rod that he's going to rule with later. But what do you think about that verse now, that Jesus will break the yoke of their burden and the staff on their shoulders?
It reminds me of that verse in or in the Luke 11 or something like that, where he says, "Take my yoke upon you. My yoke is easy and my burden is light."
Yes, very much so.
That I hadn't put that with that, but he does for
He
us
does.
in
Yeah,
the spiritual way.
he does. Yeah. What I think, go ahead, Kim.
Sorry, I didn't think of this when I first was looking, just as we're talking. Do you think that's the burden of the law as well?
Ooh.
Could be as well. Yes, that was definitely happening then for them, right? Jesus broke that, or if they were willing, broke that burden for them. Good. There's this freedom from captivity here, which I find very interesting in this passage for what's happening with Isaiah and what's portrayed here about the future with Jesus. And I think about those names even, and the fact that they were signs for the time. So there's a son born who says, "You will not be free." And then there's a son that says, "There will be a remnant." And so I just thought that was very interesting, this picture of both things, that God was telling them, there's a child that predicts the captivity in Isaiah, and there's a child that predicts their future freedom, which would be Jesus, and also even the one then. So now I think about Isaiah 7 to 14 to 17 and think, wow, there's Jesus and this other son both there, and in 8, right? There's a child born that's going to free you, but first there's going to be a child that's a sign for your captivity. And in a way, we still get to make that choice. We still get to make the choice of, will we follow the freedom that's there or the other one?
It's cool that the first son was the one that offered hope. You know, it's like, there's hope,
Yes.
but you can't, but you know, it's gonna be bad. But you know, he like offers hope to us in as we're heading down a path that maybe, you know, I have hope. I have hope. There is where hope is. Which path you're going to choose.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Other thoughts as we wrap this. I want to go back to a passage in a second, but I want to give you guys time to ask any questions or your thoughts here on these chapters all stuck together now that we've had them all together. Okay. Would somebody want to do some reading for us? I only have partial of what I want in front of us. Would somebody open up to 1 Peter chapter 2, which is one of the verses we had about the stone, but I want to read a little bit more of it. So if you would open 1 Peter 2 and then read verses 1 through 9. So it contains the verses we had, but I loved what was at the beginning. And the verse at the end is one I think I've shared with you guys before when we talk about ourselves of, are we a people of God? This is a great verse for you to connect with Isaiah and ourselves here at the end of 1 Peter. But if you would read 1 Peter 2, verses 1 through 9, I'm going to use a minute of our time because I think it's good.
I can do that.
Okay, Melinda.
Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. Like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by men, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be holy, a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame." Now, to you who believe, this stone is precious, but to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone, and a stone that causes men to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light.
Isn't that so beautiful with where we are in Isaiah 9? And so that last verse is the one I've had it up on screens before, and I don't think I've ever had time to share it with you. But you are these things. It's a very similar description to how the nation of Israel was called. And so for me, that's been my connector point to the book of Isaiah. It's been one of the connector points. And this light, and then the catching of, if you're disobedient, right? There's this idea of choice. If you're disobedient to the word, if you believe he's precious, but to those who are disobedient, those he will be the stumbling stone, the stumbling block too. So I just love that verse, and wanted to make sure we got time in to share it since it was part of our passage. I couldn't help but do that. All right, any other thoughts before we go into prayer time?